A millionaire suddenly froze when he saw a little girl in ragged clothes, her hair tangled, her dirty hands struggling to feed her baby brother with an old bottle. His heart tightened as he caught sight of those eyes, both tender and unyielding. But he never imagined that only a few seconds later, this encounter would change his entire life. Before we begin, please leave a comment about this story and give us a score from 1 to 10. Are you doing okay? If there is something you would like to share, I am always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of reflection as you follow this healing story, along with its journey of courage and justice. Rosie Mendoza was a lively little girl, always smiling, living in a small family filled with joy. Her father was a carpenter, his calloused hands always carrying the faint scent of freshly sawed pine. Her mother was gentle, often sitting by the window mending clothes, humming short melodies as she worked. On warm afternoons, Rosie remembered clearly. Her father working tirelessly at the saw table, her mother softly singing, while she lay on the rug playing and teasing her baby brother Ryan. Ryan was not yet a year old, tiny, his chubby cheeks turning pink every time his sister pinched them lightly. Their wooden house in the suburbs was simple, nothing luxurious, but it was filled with laughter, a place where Rosie believed her childhood would always remain peaceful. But that happiness was only a memory now. A raging fire in the dark night had consumed everything. Within just a few hours, the familiar wooden house turned into a pile of ashes. Rosie could still hear the crash of the collapsing roof, her mother's panicked voice calling her children, and then the dreadful silence when the flames swallowed it all. Her parents were gone, leaving Rosie clutching Ryan, her face smeared with soot, her small hands trembling. The funeral was rushed. Only a few acquaintances came to pay respects. When the last stick of incense burned out, Rosie understood that she and her brother had become orphans, with no home to return to. After the funeral, everyone dispersed. The weather turned cold. A sharp wind swept through the empty yard. Rosie held Ryan in her arms, her heart pounding, not knowing where to go. She thought of Uncle Thomas and Aunt Veronica's house. Though she did not have many memories of them, Rosie believed blood relatives could not turn their backs. At the very least, they would give her and her brother a roof to stay under. The road to their house was not far, but for an 8-year-old carrying a baby, every step felt like sinking deeper into an abyss. Ryan buried his face against her shoulder, his eyes red and tired from endless days of crying. Rosie clenched her fist, telling herself she had to be strong. "I'm the older sister. I can't cry. Ryan needs me." The house of Thomas and Veronica appeared behind an old iron fence. Rosie swallowed hard and stepped up to knock. Her tiny hand shook. 3 knocks echoed through the quiet yard. The door opened slightly, and Veronica appeared. The 38-year-old woman wore a gray sweater, her face lightly made up, her lips pressed tightly together. She looked at Rosie and Ryan as if facing an unwanted burden. Rosie hugged Ryan closer, her voice trembling. "Aunt, please let us stay. I'll work. I'll behave. I promise." Veronica frowned, her eyes cold and sharp. Her voice came out dry. "There's no room here for extra mouths to feed. Your parents still owed us $3,000. Who's going to pay that?" Rosie froze, her eyes filling with tears. "They're gone. Does that mean you'll abandon us too?" Veronica turned her face away, as if she wanted to end the conversation. But then heavy footsteps sounded from behind. Thomas appeared. He was 45, tall, broad-shouldered, with a square face and rough stubble. His eyes were as cold as steel, his voice hoarse and curt. "Go away. I can't feed you. Don't stand here bothering me." Startled, Rosie quickly dropped to her knees right at the doorway, holding Ryan with one arm while the other pressed against the cold brick floor. Tears streamed down her face. "Please, Uncle, just give me a corner of the house. I'll take care of my brother myself. I'll do every chore. I won't bother anyone." Thomas scowled, his voice sharp. "No means no. Don't dream about it." Ryan flinched and burst into tears, his weak wailing only making Rosie more frantic. She bent her head low to the ground, trembling. "Please don't drive us away. I have nowhere else to go." But Thomas had already turned his back, walking inside without a glance. Veronica sighed, not out of pity, but irritation. She shook her head, stepped out, and yanked the door hard. Before closing it, her voice was ice cold. Find somewhere else to live. Don't come back here again." The door slammed shut. The sound of the lock clicking echoed dry and final. Rosie remained on her knees, holding Ryan, who was crying uncontrollably. She pressed her face to his shoulder, trying to soothe him, but her throat was tight. Her small shoulders trembled, her heart felt shattered. She had never felt so alone. Every adult around her had turned their back. The whole world seemed closed off. Rosie sank down on the cold step, her vision blurred with tears. In her head, only one question pounded over and over like a drumbeat. So where do we go now? Rosie stood up from the doorstep after the door of her aunt and uncle's house slammed shut, the sound of the lock still echoing in her head. She held Ryan tightly, her tears not yet dry when the night wind whipped across her face, cold enough to numb her skin. The road ahead was pitch dark, not a single light bright enough to show the way. Rosie kept her head down, taking heavy, slow steps, whispering to soothe her little brother as she walked. "It's okay, Ryan. I'm here. I won't leave you." That night, Rosie found a tree to sit under and rest. Ryan had fallen asleep on her shoulder, but his weak breathing terrified her. She forced her eyes open, clutching him as if the entire world might snatch him away if she let her guard down for even a second. The days that followed, Rosie wandered the streets. Their burned-down house had become nothing more than an empty lot, with nothing left to return to. She went to the central market, crowded with people, hoping she might find something to keep her brother alive. One morning, as the sun had just begun to rise, Rosie sat huddled next to a trash bin near a vegetable stall. She bent down to pick up a plastic bottle, her tiny hands smeared with dirt. Just as she was about to drop it into a plastic bag, a vendor's sharp voice cut through the air. "Get out of here. This isn't a place for beggars." Rosie flinched, pulling Ryan closer, her eyes wide with fear. She shook her head slightly, her voice so faint it nearly dissolved into the wind. "I just want the bottle. Please, I need milk for my brother." The woman frowned, glanced quickly at the flushed baby crying in Rosie's arms, then waved her away and turned back to her stall without another word. Rosie bit her lip and bent down again. Every grimy bottle made her palms sting, but she didn't dare leave any behind. Ryan squirmed and wailed, and Rosie's cracked voice tried to soothe him. "I know you're hungry. Just wait a little. I'll get you milk." That afternoon, Rosie heard there was free porridge at the church. She rushed over with Ryan in her arms and lined up. The line stretched long, filled with adults jostling forward. Small and frail, Rosie was pushed to the back, but she bit down hard, holding Ryan close, trying to stand firm. A hard shove from behind nearly sent her sprawling. Ryan lurched and screamed. At that very moment, an old yet steady hand caught him in time. An elderly woman with silver hair, thin but with kind eyes, held Ryan briefly before handing him back. Her voice trembled but carried warmth. "You're so little, carrying your baby brother like this. Poor child." Rosie lowered her head, her hands trembling around Ryan, and bit her lip as she answered, "I can't let him go. If I fall, he'll get hurt." The old woman stayed silent, sighed, and guided Rosie forward in line. Thanks to her, Rosie received a bowl of hot porridge. She set Ryan in her lap, blew gently on each spoonful, and fed him slowly. Ryan swallowed weakly, his eyes half closed. Watching him eat, Rosie felt both relief and tears welling up. She only ate a few leftover spoonfuls herself, her stomach burning with hunger, but she saved most for her brother. When she looked up again, the old woman was gone, her small frame lost in the crowd. Rosie wanted to call out her thanks, but her throat closed up, and no sound came. That night, Rosie found shelter under the overhang of a supermarket. The streetlights flickered yellow, cars sped by on the road. She laid Ryan in her lap, quickly pulling her torn shirt over his chest to block the wind. Ryan cried hard, his wails cutting through the night. Rosie panicked, rocking him gently, humming in a shaky whisper, "Hush, go to sleep, Ryan. I'm here. Don't cry." Her childish voice wavered, the words incomplete, but the love behind them had no limit. Her tears fell onto Ryan's fine hair. She sang and sobbed until her eyes burned, yet she didn't dare close them. Night after night, Rosie forced herself to be stronger. At first, she only knew fear and tears, but slowly, a fierce resolve grew inside her. She told herself, "As long as my brother is breathing, I won't give up." Time went on, day after day. Rosie traded every plastic bottle and aluminum can for a few coins to buy powdered milk. When she couldn't, she begged for charity porridge and gave it all to Ryan. Her small hands grew calloused, her nails chipped, but not once did she let go. In the hot season, she shaded him with cardboard scraps. In the rains, they sat soaked under building eaves, Ryan burning with a slight fever, while Rosie held him tight all night, shivering yet refusing to sleep. From a once carefree little girl, Rosie had been forced to grow up. 6 months had passed since the day her aunt and uncle shut the door on her. 6 months surviving on scraps of strangers' pity. 6 months forcing herself to be both mother and father to a newborn. Rosie's eyes no longer shone with innocence, but carried the weight of exhaustion. And yet, deep inside, a steady fire of resilience still glimmered. One gloomy afternoon, the sky gray with cold winds though no rain fell, Rosie carried Ryan past a wealthy neighborhood. Before her stood a large house with gleaming glass windows. She stopped, staring at the reflection of the two of them in the glass, thin, ragged, and frail. Rosie bit her lip, pressed Ryan's face into her shoulder, and whispered without thinking, "I wish we had a place to live like that too." The small wish drifted into the air, but it etched itself deep into Rosie's heart, like a faint spark lighting the path through the darkness ahead. Rosie carried Ryan away from the wealthy street with its glowing windows. The whisper that had just slipped from her lips, "I wish we had a place like that too," still lingered in her mind. But the harsh reality pulled her back. Ryan cried uncontrollably, his face flushed, his small hand beating against her shoulder as if urging her. Rosie looked around and finally spotted a piece of cardboard thrown beside a large trash bin. She sat down, placed Ryan in her lap, and searched through her torn bag for a few spoonfuls of powdered milk that were left. The meager powder was mixed with cold water in an old plastic bottle, so diluted it was hardly more than colored water. Rosie shook the bottle hard, then brought it to her brother's lips. Ryan latched onto the nipple, sucking greedily, his red eyes slowly closing. Watching him drink the thin, cold liquid, Rosie felt her throat tighten. She let out a sigh and leaned against the trash bin, her back aching. Nights on the street, each day repeating with her brother's cries and her begging for food, had drained her strength. Rosie wondered, "How much longer until I find us a real home?" The sound of a car engine echoed from the end of the street, breaking her thoughts. Headlights swept over, forcing Rosie to squint. A shiny red car slowed down and stopped right at the curb. The luxury vehicle, its body gleaming under the streetlights, was nothing like the old cars Rosie usually saw. The window slid down, and a middle-aged man in a driver's uniform turned toward the back seat, his voice low but clear. "Sir, we should go. This place is filthy." Inside the car, Shane Williams sat in silence. The 40-year-old man was the owner of a luxury automobile corporation known across the United States. He wore a dark gray suit, his tie perfectly straight, his hair neatly combed, his angular face radiating calm. To outsiders, Shane was the very image of success and coldness. He was known as a man who never got entangled in romance, dedicating his life only to billion-dollar deals. Shane had intended to ignore it, but his eyes stopped at the sight by the roadside. A frail little girl clutching a baby in her arms, sitting on a piece of cardboard beside a trash bin. The old bottle in her hand swayed, and the watery liquid inside made him realize it could hardly be called milk. Shane's eyes flickered. He sat up straight, his voice low but firm. "Wait." The driver was startled for a moment, but quickly fell silent, keeping the car still. Shane pushed the door open and stepped out. His leather shoes struck the dusty, damp pavement with a heavy sound. Rosie heard the noise and immediately stiffened. She wrapped her arms tighter around Ryan, pressing him against her chest, her fearful eyes lifting toward the strange man walking closer. "Are you here all alone?" Shane asked, his voice low and steady, not harsh but firm enough for Rosie to hear. Rosie stepped back, her small back almost pressed against the trash bin. She clutched Ryan tightly and answered quickly, her voice trembling, "Don't come closer. Everyone just looks and walks away." Those words made Shane freeze mid-step. He stood still, letting each word sink in. Everyone just looks and walks away. That small, fragile sentence cut into him like a blade, stirring old memories. Years ago, he too had sat alone on a porch, abandoned by his father, ignored by neighbors who walked past without stopping. Shane drew in a breath and softened his tone. "I'm not like them. I just want to help." But Rosie didn't believe him. Her red, swollen eyes were filled with doubt. She shook her head, clutching Ryan even tighter, like a small cat arching its back to protect its young. Ryan began to cry. The bottle in Rosie's hand was empty, its rubber nipple sucked dry. She shook it again and again, but not a drop came out. The baby's cries grew louder, tearing through the night. Rosie panicked, rocking him without success, her own eyes welling with tears. Shane watched, his throat tightening. He couldn't just turn away. He walked back to the car and signaled to the driver. The man hesitated, but still opened the trunk and handed over a small bag. Inside was a freshly bought bottle of warm milk and some bread Shane had picked up at the supermarket earlier. Shane took it and walked back. He stopped a few steps away from Rosie, holding the bottle out to her. "Take it. Give it to the baby. It's fresh milk." Rosie's eyes widened. She looked at the bottle, then back at him. Her small hand trembled. She wanted to refuse, but Ryan's cries shattered her hesitation. She let out a shaky breath, reached out, and took the bottle, never taking her eyes off the stranger. She quickly replaced the old bottle with the new one and pressed it to Ryan's lips. The baby latched on hungrily, sucking with desperate relief, his tiny hands waving as if he had just been saved. Rosie stared at him, then suddenly burst into tears. The sobs shook her thin shoulders as tears rolled down her cheeks, mixing with a faint, fragile smile. She choked out, Why do you care? No one has ever asked about us." Shane fell silent. Her question cracked something open inside him, pulling him back to his own childhood. He saw himself at 12, starving in a dark house, waiting for his father to come home, only to be met with the stench of alcohol and an empty, cold stare. He didn't answer right away. His deep eyes carried that old wound, raw and aching. Rosie wiped her tears but kept her wary gaze on him. She still didn't trust him. For half a year, countless people had passed by, glancing at her with pity before turning away. No one had ever truly stopped. Shane stayed where he was, not taking a single step closer, just quietly watching the siblings. He understood. A child betrayed too many times would never open her heart so easily. Ryan finished his milk, his eyelids growing heavy until he finally drifted off. Rosie pressed her cheek to his soft hair, her tears soaking into it. She lifted her face, her voice hoarse and broken. "Don't give us hope and then leave. My heart can't take it anymore." Shane's chest tightened. His fists clenched, and he felt the ice inside him beginning to crack. He drew a deep breath and went back to the car. The driver was still in the seat, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror. Shane didn't get in. He turned his head and looked at Rosie one last time. "Come with me," he said softly, his voice warm yet firm. "You can't live like this." Rosie lifted her head, her heartbeat racing. Those words were unlike anything she had ever heard before. On the sidewalk, the night breeze swept past, carrying away the stench of garbage. What remained was a tense silence between a successful man and two wandering children. In that moment, their fates began to shift toward an entirely different path. The red car sped through the silent night, leaving behind filthy streets littered with trash. Rosie sat pressed against the window, holding Ryan tightly to her chest. The baby had fed and fallen asleep, his steady breaths whispering softly, but Rosie could not close her eyes. She kept watching the strange man beside her, her wary gaze fixed as if the moment he changed his mind, she would grab her brother and run. Shane leaned back in his seat, his eyes on the world outside. He stayed silent, unwilling to force the child to speak. The guarded look in the girl's eyes reminded him of himself years ago, when he too had stared at others with that same mistrust. The car turned onto a smooth cobblestone road. Rows of trees stretched ahead, faint streetlights spilling down and revealing the white stones beneath. At the end of the road, a large iron gate rose tall and imposing. The driver pressed a button, and the gate slowly swung open, revealing a spacious courtyard beyond. Rosie pulled back nervously. In front of her stood a grand house, warm yellow light glowing from tall windows. Dark roof tiles and gleaming white walls gave the impression she had just stepped into another world. The car stopped. Shane stepped out first, then opened the other door for Rosie. She sat frozen for a moment, then whispered with a trembling voice, If you send us away, we'll leave right away." Shane bent down, his gaze deep. "This will be a temporary place for you both. No one will hurt you." Rosie bit her lip, lifted Ryan into her arms, and stepped onto the freezing gravel with her bare feet. The large front door swung open. A middle-aged woman came out. She was about 50, her posture straight, her hair neatly tied back, dressed in a black housekeeper's uniform. Her face was stern, but her eyes were kind. "Sir, you've returned," she greeted Shane with a slight bow, then glanced at Rosie. Shane nodded. "This is Mrs. Helen, the housekeeper here. She will look after you." Helen offered a gentle smile and nodded to Rosie. "Hello, dear. Don't be afraid. Come in." Rosie gave a small nod, clutching Ryan as she stepped across the threshold. The moment she entered, she froze. The house was enormous, with a high ceiling and glittering crystal chandeliers. Polished wooden floors reflected the light. Walls were lined with artwork and towering bookshelves. Everything felt strange, too luxurious, making Rosie hug Ryan tighter as her heart pounded. Helen led Rosie upstairs to a neat little room. The bed was covered with spotless white sheets, soft pillows, and the faint scent of fresh linen. Rosie stood at the doorway, too intimidated to step inside. After Helen left, Rosie laid Ryan on the bed, but quickly picked him back up and sat curled in the hallway. Leaning against the wall, the siblings dozed off on the cold floor. Only one thought echoed in Rosie's mind. "If we get sent away tomorrow, at least I won't have dirtied their sheets." Late that night, Shane walked past and saw the two children sleeping outside the room. He stopped, staring for a long time before kneeling down to ask quietly, "Why didn't you sleep in the room?" Rosie startled awake, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched Ryan tighter and stammered, I was afraid if I slept there we'd be sent away tomorrow." Shane stood still, her answer pressed painfully against his chest. He opened the door and spoke with a steady, warm voice. "Go inside. That room belongs to you." Rosie hesitated, then nodded quickly, carrying Ryan into the room. Near dawn, Ryan's cries filled the air. Rosie scrambled up, fumbling with a bottle. The water inside was cold, the formula clumped, and panic flickered across her face. Shane happened to walk into the kitchen. He was still in his white shirt, tie loosened, his face weary. Seeing Rosie struggle, he stepped closer, took the formula tin, and tried to prepare it. But his hands were clumsy, hot water spilled across the table, powder scattered everywhere. Rosie gasped and rushed over. Let me do it. I'm used to it." Shane watched her small hands measure and shake the bottle with quick precision, his gaze softening. Rosie glanced up and saw him fumbling like a child, and for the first time, her lips curved into a faint smile. Both of them suddenly laughed. Just a small laugh, but it swept away some of the tension that had gripped them for days. Ryan fed contentedly. Rosie sighed in relief, holding him close again, her eyes still cautious but carrying a glimmer of warmth. Before returning to the room, Rosie found a small scrap of paper and scribbled a few shaky words in her childish handwriting. She left it on the kitchen table, where she knew Shane would see it. "I will be good. Please don't send me away." The next morning, Shane walked in and found the note. He stood frozen for a long time, his hand trembling as he picked it up. His eyes reddened, and the crooked letters of a child pierced straight through the ice he had kept inside for so many years. Clutching the paper tightly, Shane exhaled a long breath. For the first time in years, he felt he was no longer alone. That morning, after holding the piece of paper with Rosie's crooked handwriting, Shane folded it and slipped it into the pocket of his vest. He stood still for a long while, then walked out of the kitchen. In the living room, the sound of small footsteps echoed. Rosie carried Ryan down the stairs, her cautious eyes scanning the room. When she saw Shane, she quickly lowered her head, not daring to look at him for long. Shane sat down at the dining table. Helen had already prepared breakfast: toast, butter, fried eggs, and a jug of fresh milk. Rosie stood frozen at the doorway, uneasy. Ryan waved his arms and laughed, lightening the atmosphere. "Come here," Shane said briefly, his voice deep but not cold. "Eat with us." Rosie gave a slight nod, carrying Ryan over. Helen had placed a high chair ready, and Rosie set her brother into it. As for herself, she pulled out a chair at the corner of the table, holding a small piece of bread, eating quickly. Her eyes kept darting around as if afraid someone would scold her. Shane noticed. He put down his fork and knife, leaning forward. "No one here will take your share. Eat slowly." Rosie froze. Her heart tightened, but she lowered her head, picked up a small piece of egg, and chewed slowly. Her eyes still glanced sideways, as if she could not quite believe it. At that moment, Ryan slapped his hand on the table, spilling milk onto the tablecloth. He laughed, swaying his little body. Rosie hurried to clean it, her face flushing red, but Shane let out a soft chuckle. His laugh carried over to Rosie. For a brief instant, the awkwardness melted away. After breakfast, Rosie helped Helen clean up. She tried to work quickly, not wanting to be seen as a burden. But while carrying a tray of glasses to the sink, her small hands trembled and a crystal cup slipped. The sharp sound of shattering glass rang out. Fragments scattered everywhere. Rosie's face went pale, her heart racing. She knelt down quickly, trembling, stammering, "Please don't send us away. I'll clean everything. I'm sorry." Just as she reached out to pick up a shard, Shane rushed over and firmly held her wrist. His voice was low, decisive, but not angry. "Stop. Things can be replaced, but you cannot. I will never send you away for this." Rosie looked up, her eyes wide with shock. Tears welled up. In her memory, every time she broke something, she received only shouting and scolding. This was the first time an adult stopped her from being hurt instead of punishing her. A strange warmth seeped into her heart. Rosie stood frozen, not knowing what to say, except for a quick nod. In the afternoon, Rosie spread out a small rug on the living room floor and set Ryan down to practice crawling. The baby pushed up shakily on his hands, swaying, then suddenly toppled forward. "Ryan!" Rosie gasped, lunging toward him. But Shane was faster, scooping the baby into his arms. Ryan burst into laughter, his tiny hand grabbing Shane's dark hair and pulling hard. Shane winced, muttering in a half-scolding tone, "Hey kid." Seeing Shane's awkward expression, Rosie couldn't hold back her laughter. The sound of children's giggles joined in, and soon all three were laughing together. The living room filled with such warmth that Rosie felt her guard begin to lower. "Maybe he really does want to keep us here," she thought, for the first time letting her heart ease. Shane looked at the two small faces in his arms, a familiar feeling rising within him. He realized that love was not something that could be planned. It came from ordinary, simple moments like this. By late afternoon, as Shane stepped out to the porch to take in the air, a short, sturdy woman with curly silver hair and a brisk manner approached. It was Mrs. Miller, a neighbor around 60 years old, well known across the neighborhood for her gossiping nature. "I heard you're taking care of 2 orphans?" She squinted, her voice full of curiosity. "The whole town is talking about it." Shane paused, a sharp glint flashing in his eyes. From inside, Rosie overheard, her heart pounding. She hugged Ryan tighter, fear welling up inside her. If everyone was gossiping, would he change his mind? The warmth that had just settled in was suddenly pulled tight like a stretched string. Shane closed the gate after Mrs. Miller's words and turned back into the house. He saw Rosie standing behind the glass door, holding Ryan in her arms. The little girl avoided his eyes, yet still tried to ask a timid question, as if testing his response. Shane gave a short nod, silently telling her don't worry, then motioned for Helen to take the siblings into the living room where it was warm. He stayed a moment longer on the porch, inhaling deeply, trying to press down the sting that had just pierced his own private wounds. Night fell. When Ryan was already asleep, Rosie sat curled up at the edge of the couch, listening to the wind outside in the garden. Suddenly, heavy, urgent knocks echoed from the gate. Helen startled, lifting her head. The intercom in the foyer buzzed. A man's voice came through the speaker. "Sir, there are 2 people at the gate, knocking hard. It was Jonah, the night guard who had started just last week, a big man with a calm way of speaking. Shane strode quickly out to the yard. The gate cracked open. Under the light, Thomas stood with his hands on his hips, his face dark with anger, while Veronica's mascara streaked down her cheeks. She clutched a tissue, and the moment she saw Shane, she burst into tears. Rosie hugged Ryan and hid behind the curtain, peeking through the fabric, her heart pounding against her chest. Veronica's voice broke, fighting back sobs. "My brother just died. We are the legal guardians. You have no right to keep them." Shane met her eyes without flinching. "If you're really the guardians, why did you throw them out that night?" Veronica faltered, then quickly grabbed Thomas's arm, as if borrowing strength. Thomas stepped forward half a pace, his voice sharp. "You have money, we don't. If you want to keep the kids, give us $50,000. Behind the curtain, Rosie shook violently. She pressed Ryan against her chest and whispered so softly no one else in the room could hear. "Uncle, why do you want to sell us?" Jonah shifted, placing himself diagonally behind Shane, his eyes alert. Helen set a hand on Rosie's shoulder, guiding her deeper into the room, signaling her to stay quiet. Shane raised his brows. "You call that guardianship? You're putting a price on children right at someone else's front gate?" Veronica wiped her tears, her tone suddenly shifting to reproach. "Please, understand our situation. Raising 2 kids is expensive. If you want to keep them, then share the burden." Thomas cut in harshly. "Stop stalling. Where's the money?" Shane lowered his voice, icy enough to freeze the air. "Not a single cent, and there will be no bargaining here." Thomas clenched his fists, veins bulging on his neck. "You'll regret this. We'll sue." Shane stepped forward just 1 pace, his stare locked and unyielding. "Go ahead and sue, but right now, get off my property." The courtyard suddenly thickened with tension. Thomas staggered as his way was blocked, stepped back half a pace, then turned sharply away. Veronica did not follow immediately. She rushed to the middle of the sidewalk, dropped to her knees, and burst into loud sobs. Her crying dragged on, broken and deliberate, echoing down the street like a siren. Jonah shut the gate at Shane's signal, then stood silently as a barrier inside. Across the way, Veronica wept while lamenting, "I lost my brother. Now they're stealing my niece from me. My God, anyone who is a mother would understand." Her words drew curious neighbors to stop. A few doors cracked open. Phones began to rise. Mrs. Miller appeared at the end of the alley, arms folded, eyes darting about. The murmurs swelled like a hive of bees breaking loose. In the living room, Rosie clutched Ryan and crouched behind the chair. She heard the crying outside, and her hands trembled violently. A fearful thought crept in. If the noise grew worse, would he waver? Helen knelt down to meet her gaze, speaking softly. "Look at me. Breathe in, breathe out. No one is taking you two anywhere." Rosie nodded, but her throat remained tight, her eyes fixed on Shane's figure out in the yard. Shane said nothing more to the crowd. He turned his back and walked straight inside. Jonah stayed on the porch, angling his shoulders to block the view inside. As Shane crossed the threshold, he saw Rosie pressed against the wall. She did not dare to ask, only tightened her hold on Ryan until her fingertips went white. Shane stopped, speaking just loud enough for her alone to hear, "I won't change my mind." Those 3 words made Rosie's shoulders drop. She nodded, her eyes red, then pressed Ryan closer to her chest. From outside, Jonah reported through the intercom, "They still won't leave, sir. More people are gathering." Shane replied curtly, "Call the local police. Report a disturbance in front of private property." Jonah answered with a crisp, "Yes, sir," and stepped away to make the call. At the gate, Veronica cried louder. Thomas returned to stir things up, pointing at the camera above the gate and shouting, "Record it! Record it! He's kidnapping our niece!" The crowd erupted in a mix of doubt and belief. Some whispered about the 2 orphan children and the millionaire. Rumors began fermenting on the sidewalk like yeast in the air. Shane passed Rosie, gently resting his hand on her shoulder as reassurance, then told Helen, "Take them to the back room. Lock the door. Let me handle outside." His voice was not loud, but firm and clear as a command. In the small room, Rosie laid Ryan in the cradle. She stood by the door, listening to the noise at the gate roll in like waves. Every sound outside cut through her memory of 6 months wandering. She pressed her lips together and told herself, "Don't be afraid. He said he won't change his mind." The siren of a police car wailed at the end of the street. Helen looked at Rosie and whispered, "Hear that? Things will calm down now." Rosie nodded, her hands still gripping the cradle's edge. Outside, red and blue lights flickered against the gate. Veronica still cried, Thomas's voice still strained, and neighbors gathered into a growing line. The private story of 3 people inside the house was suddenly dragged out before the eyes of a crowd. And from that restless murmur, the news began to spread, swift as a spark catching the wind. When the red and green lights at the gate finally went out, Jonah slid the bolt, checked the cameras, and came back to report briefly. "It's clear, sir." Shane nodded. The house settled into silence. The sound of wind through the trees felt like a long sigh after a storm. Inside the small room, Rosie did not sleep. She sat leaning against the headboard, holding Ryan close to her chest. The baby's eyes were barely open, watching the door, waiting for familiar footsteps. Shane stood at the threshold. He didn't switch on the ceiling light, only the small lamp on the table. The soft yellow glow touched the faces of the 3 of them. Rosie looked at him for a while, then gathered her courage. Do you have parents?" Shane was silent for a few seconds. He pulled a chair closer and sat down so his eyes met hers. "Yes, but I never had a family." Rosie froze, her voice smaller. "Were you abandoned too?" Shane leaned back in the chair, his fingers interlaced. "My mother died early. My father drank a lot. When he was drunk, he forgot who I was. At 12, I left home. Slept in the corner of a garage, washed car parts for dinner. In the winter, my hands cracked and bled, but at least no one threw me out." He exhaled slowly. "Later, I worked endlessly. I thought if I had no family, I wouldn't hurt anyone, and no one could hurt me again. I never thought of having children because I was afraid one day I'd become like my father." Rosie held Ryan tighter. She looked into his eyes, speaking slowly, each word steady. "But you didn't abandon me. That means you're already different." The words landed softly, yet deep. Shane turned his face away for a moment to hide the moisture in his eyes, then gave a faint smile. "Maybe I'm learning to be different, thanks to you two." Ryan stirred, making a soft sound. Rosie gently patted his back. Shane stood, pulled the blanket higher, then opened a drawer and took out a small moon-shaped lamp. He plugged it in, and a soothing light spread through the corner of the room. Rosie glanced at the lamp and whispered, "I'm afraid of the dark." Shane nodded. "I used to be too. When there's light, fear becomes smaller." He hesitated, then added, almost like a small promise, "If you wake up in the night, just call. I'll come." Rosie didn't answer, only gave a tiny nod. After a long pause, she drew a breath. "I'll try to eat slower, and I won't drop things anymore." Shane chuckled, the sound soft. "If you drop something, we'll replace it. Eating slowly, you'll learn with time. No one here will throw you out for that." They stayed like that for quite a while, words no longer necessary. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. Outside, the yard was so still they could hear the leaves brushing together. In that calm, something inside Shane's chest eased. He realized the fear of repeating the past had loosened, because the present was teaching him a new version of himself. Rosie's eyes closed little by little. Before drifting into sleep, she murmured, "If I wake up early tomorrow, I'll set the table." Shane pushed the chair back and rose. "All right, but remember to save a place for me." He dimmed the light, leaving only the small moon glowing in the corner. As he left the doorway, Shane unconsciously touched the pocket where he kept Rosie's scribbled note. The thin paper weighed on him like an anchor. Morning. Dew still lay faint across the lawn. Helen was preparing a bottle of milk when the gate buzzer rang once, short and sharp. Jonah checked the camera and reported over the radio, "There's a courier, sealed envelope, requires signature." Shane went to the foyer. A man of about 30 stood waiting. wearing a dark blue jacket with a name tag pinned to his chest. Caleb, Summit Legal Courier. He was polite, his tone neutral. Mr. Shane Williams, I have urgent documents from the firm Rooker & Dunn. Please confirm receipt. Shane signed. Caleb handed over a thick envelope embossed with a seal. He gave a nod, turned, and walked away, disappearing at the corner with brisk, quiet steps as if he had left no sound at all. Shane stood beneath the porch, staring at the ivory envelope in his hand. Helen came closer and offered a letter opener. He slit the edge, pulled out a stack of documents. The first line struck his eyes. Lawsuit. Petition for the return of a minor and accusation of child abduction. Just then, Rosie passed the foyer, carrying Ryan. She caught sight of Shane's darkened face. She froze, clutching her brother closer. No one spoke, but both could hear clearly another sound rising inside the house, the rustle of papers, like the lid of a new storm being lifted. Shane tucked the folder into his briefcase, gently closed the front door, and walked to the car. Rosie held Ryan tightly, following him down the steps. Inside the courthouse elevator, the little girl clung to his sleeve. The door opened on the third floor. Before them stretched a long hallway, rows of wooden benches, and a sign that read, Courtroom 3. Shane leaned down, speaking softly so only Rosie could hear. I'm here. She nodded, holding Ryan against her chest, and walked slowly beside him. Inside, the white lights were harsh and cold. The clerk called out the names of the parties, voice clear and steady. On the opposite bench, Thomas sat with his back straight, chin lifted high. Veronica wore a dark shawl, her eyes red, a tissue clenched in her hand. Beside them sat a thin man with slicked back hair and sharp eyes. The nameplate on his pocket read, Blake Esquire. On Shane's side was a woman in her 40s, hair neatly tied, gaze firm and direct. Evelyn Parker, attorney. She tilted her head slightly toward Rosie, a subtle gesture meant to reassure. The bailiff called out, All rise. Judge Harris entered, striking the gavel once. His voice was calm, impartial. Be seated. We will begin. The tension gripped the room instantly. Rosie sat small in the front row, Shane beside her, his hand steadying her trembling one. Ryan slept soundly in the blanket, his breathing even. Thomas jumped up first, his voice blazing with accusation. He kidnapped our niece to polish his image. Veronica sniffled, her words broken and halting. I just want the girl back. She is my blood. The judge leaned forward. You will have time to speak. Please sit. Attorney Blake rose, spreading his hands like an orator. Your Honor, my clients are the natural guardians, stripped of their rights by a cunning act of abduction masked as charity. Parker did not argue immediately. She opened her case, sliding a folder toward the clerk. Your Honor, this is Exhibit A, a sworn statement from 3 neighbors of the plaintiffs confirming that the 2 children were thrown out of the house the night after the funeral. And Exhibit B, a promissory note for $3,000 signed by Mr. Thomas himself, establishing financial motive. The clerk carried the documents to the bench. The judge flipped through them, nodding slightly. Call the witness. The rear door opened. A middle-aged man of average build, wearing a checkered shirt, walked in with steady steps. The clerk asked his name, and he answered quietly. Miguel Ortiz, neighbor at number 24. He raised his hand to swear, then spoke in a plain, honest tone. I saw them throw the children out. That night, the baby cried non-stop, and the girl held him kneeling on the steps. I called out, but they slammed the door shut. Blake approached, voice hard. Mr. Ortiz, can you be certain those were the children my clients were responsible for? Ortiz looked him straight in the eye. I lived next door for 3 years. I know that baby's cry, and the way the girl held him. I also know the sound of that door slamming. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Parker lowered her voice. Did you hear anything about money being demanded? Ortiz nodded. A few days later, I heard Thomas shouting in the street, saying if anyone wanted to keep the children, they had to bring him money. Veronica shot to her feet. You're lying. The judge struck the gavel. Order. Parker signaled to Shane. He placed another document on the bench. a short audio recording submitted by another neighbor before the hearing, with verified timestamp. The judge listened briefly through the clerk's headset, then nodded and made a note. Parker turned toward her side, lowering her voice for Rosie. "You may speak if you're ready, or we can stop here." Rosie looked at Shane. He only gave a small nod. She handed Ryan to Helen in the back row, then stood, her hands clasped tightly. The bailiff led her to the stand. The clerk asked her name, and she answered softly, but clearly. Parker did not press her. She asked only what mattered. "How many times did you knock? Who said what?" Rosie recounted each detail, straight and simple. Then Parker paused. "What do you want to tell the court, in your own words?" Rosie looked down at her worn shoes, drew in a deep breath, then lifted her head. "They didn't want us. They only wanted money." The words fell heavy, silencing every whisper. A woman in the back discreetly wiped her eyes. Helen pressed her lips together. Shane sat below, his throat tight. He felt pride that the girl had stood tall before her fear, and sorrow that an 8-year-old was forced to speak truth like an adult. Blake exhaled sharply, shifting tactics. "Little girl, at Mr. Williams's house. Did anyone force you to say this?" Rosie shook her head, her voice hoarse. "Number. He just made milk and told me to eat slowly." A short laugh burst somewhere in the room, then died quickly. The judge's expression hardened. Silence. He leaned back, fingers interlaced, surveying each side. The court has heard enough. He carefully reviewed the points aloud, the direct witness testimony, the debt note, the recording, and the actual condition of the children when taken in. His voice was even, never heated. Then he struck the gavel once, firm and final. "This court rules, Mr. Shane Williams did not violate the law. There is no evidence of abduction. The petition to return the children is denied. Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Veronica are fined for perjury and will bear court costs. Regarding temporary custody, the court recognizes the current environment as safe and stable. Further proceedings will follow, as required." For a moment, the courtroom was utterly still. Rosie turned quickly toward the benches, searching for Helen, for Ryan, for Shane's eyes. He had already risen, but he did not rush forward. He simply placed his hand over his chest, exhaling deeply, as if he had just set down a heavy stone. Veronica let out a piercing scream. "I will not let this go." Thomas pulled at her arm, his face bruised. The guard stepped forward to give a warning. The judge left the bench. The clerk gathered the files. The spectators began to murmur, but their voices slowly faded, like waves retreating from the shore. Shane stepped closer, without many words. He took Rosie's hand. The little girl's hand was still cold, but her grip was different now. At the doorway, the light from the hallway shone brighter than inside the room, as if the entire building had just opened another window. Early in the morning, sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, casting its glow over the dining table that still carried the scent of coffee. Shane had just stepped out of his study when Helen placed the morning paper on the table. Her eyes revealed clear worry. "Mr. Williams, perhaps you should read this," Helen said softly, her voice dropping lower. Shane frowned, flipping to the front page. Immediately, the bold headline hit his eyes. "Millionaire exploits orphans to polish his image." Below was a blurry photograph showing Shane leading Rosie and carrying Ryan into the hospital at night. Beside it were malicious comments, suggesting everything was nothing more than a performance to win praise. Rosie was carrying Ryan down the stairs when she saw Shane's face darken. Curious, she came closer. The moment her eyes fell on the paper, she froze, her face turning pale. "No, it's not true," Rosie stammered. Then tears spilled down her cheeks as she clutched Ryan tighter, trembling. "Are they trying to tear us apart again? Do they want everyone to hate you? And hate us too?" Shane folded the paper and set it firmly on the table. He walked over, wrapping his arm around Rosie's shoulders. His voice was low, steady. "Rumors will fade, but the truth will remain." Rosie buried her face against his chest, sobbing. She didn't fully understand the meaning of his words, but she could feel the resolve in his tone. That afternoon, the news spread throughout town. At the cafe on the corner, people talked endlessly. A young man shook his head, his voice dripping with sarcasm. With money, you can do anything. I don't believe he's sincere. A middle-aged woman added, That's right. The paper wrote it clearly. Rich people all love showing off. But right then, the bakery owner stood up, her voice firm. I saw it with my own eyes. He carried that boy to the hospital in the middle of the night when he had a high fever. His shirt was soaked with the child's sweat. Someone faking it wouldn't risk something like that. The atmosphere in the cafe quieted. The glares softened. Glances began to shift. The rumor still lingered, but the seed of resistance had been planted. The next day, when Shane took Rosie and Ryan for their routine checkup, whispers filled the hospital hallway. Curious, doubtful eyes followed them. Rosie lowered her head, her heart racing. Shane gently squeezed her hand, his gaze fixed ahead. He didn't need to speak, but each step beside her was a silent assurance. Keep walking. I'm here. In the waiting room, a young nurse approached. She bowed slightly, then spoke to Rosie in a kind voice. I was on night duty the other day. I saw him holding the boy, burning with fever, running through the halls looking for a doctor. Don't be afraid, I believe what I saw. Rosie lifted her head, tears still clinging to her lashes, and whispered, Uncle, did you hear that? Someone believes in us. Shane only gave a small nod, but inside, a knot that had tightened for so long finally began to loosen. On local social media, public opinion split into two clear sides. Some remained suspicious, posting bitter comments. A rich man being kind? Hard to believe, it's all just an act. But others spoke out in defense. I work at the pharmacy. I was the one who sold him formula. He asked about every brand, weighing each choice carefully. Someone pretending wouldn't be that meticulous. I live next door to him. I once saw him carrying the baby in the yard, walking back and forth, soothing him in the rain. An actor? Who would stand out there getting wet like that? One by one, real stories surfaced, witnesses speaking up voluntarily. One evening, the local radio station aired a special program. The voice of Miguel Ortiz, the neighbor living next to Thomas's house, rang out. I want to set this straight. I saw with my own eyes those children being thrown out of the house. It was Mr. Williams who took them in, who gave them shelter. If anyone deserves to be called their family, it's him. His words echoed across town. Listeners paused, silent for a few seconds, before many nodded in agreement. The rumor that had roared so loudly now began to unravel. In the news outlets, Thomas and Veronica's reputation collapsed. Photos of them making a scene outside the gate, demanding money shamelessly, were dug up and circulated everywhere. The entire town no longer believed in their fake tears. That night, in the living room, Rosie sat beside Shane, cradling Ryan in her arms. On the table, Shane's phone kept lighting up with messages of support, words of thanks, testimonies, encouragement. Helen smiled softly, handing Rosie a cup of warm milk. You see, sir? This is the first time you don't have to fight the whole world alone. Shane didn't answer right away. He looked at Rosie, then at Ryan, then out the window where the town's lights shone in. A sense of warmth and steadiness rose within him. He had never let anyone stand beside him before. But now, not only were there two children, there was a whole community standing with him. Rosie rested her head on his arm, asking quietly, We really have a family now, don't we, Uncle? Shane placed his hand on her hair and nodded. His voice was deep, steady. Yes, family is not just about blood. Family is where people never abandon each other. The next morning, a letter arrived at the house. The envelope bore the red seal of the court. Shane opened it, reading each line carefully, his eyes lighting up. He handed it to Rosie. Her hands trembled as she read, her voice clear with each word. The adoption procedure for Rosie and Ryan Williams has been approved. Rosie dropped the paper, clutching Ryan tightly, then threw herself into Shane's arms. Tears spilled again, but this time they were tears of happiness. We really get to stay. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, covering the three of them. And for the first time, Shane allowed that light to reach the very depths of his heart. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the glass window, spreading across the floor like a warm golden carpet. Helen had risen very early. She laid out a new tablecloth, arranged pure white flowers into a crystal vase, then turned to remind Jonah to check the car in preparation for the ceremony. The atmosphere in the house today was unlike any other day, lively, nervous, and filled with anticipation. Rosie stood in front of the mirror, wearing the simple white dress Helen had sewn late into the night. The hem brushed lightly against her ankles, making her feel a little awkward. But when she turned and saw Ryan in Shane's arms, she smiled softly. Ryan, dressed in a pale blue infant suit, had rosy cheeks and was cooing with laughter. "You look beautiful," Shane said quietly, bending down to fix the collar of Rosie's dress. He was clumsy, but his eyes overflowed with tenderness. The car rolled forward, carrying the whole family to City Hall. The hallway leading to the courtroom no longer bore the stern air of trial days. White ribbons hung on the walls, and a few vases of flowers were neatly placed, creating an atmosphere that was both solemn and warm. Judge Harris, a tall man with graying hair, entered the room. He saw Rosie clutching Shane's hand tightly while Ryan rested snugly in his arms. A gentle smile flickered across his usually serious face. He tapped the gavel lightly. "Today we are not gathered here to pass judgment, but to witness a new beginning. The court has reviewed all procedures and documents. From this day forward, Rosie and Ryan are the legal adopted children of Mr. Shane Williams." The room fell silent for a few seconds. Rosie froze, her eyes glistening, her lips trembling. She turned to Shane, hesitating as if fighting off fear, then whispered 2 words. "Dad." The word was quiet, yet it echoed straight into his heart. Shane stood still, his eyes reddening. Before he could respond, Ryan in his arms babbled, his baby voice clear and distinct. "Da, da." In that moment, Shane broke down in tears. They streamed down his face, too strong to hide. He pulled both children into his arms, holding them as if they might vanish if he let go. His voice shook. "Thank you. Thank you for calling me that." The whole room burst into applause. Helen dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Jonah bowed his head slightly to conceal his smile. Judge Harris looked on, his eyes glistening as well. When the ceremony ended, the 3 returned to the house that had now become a true home. But Shane's journey did not stop there. A week later, at the town hall, he stood on the wooden stage before hundreds of townspeople. Rosie, wearing the same white dress from the adoption ceremony, sat in the front row holding Ryan, while Helen and Jonah sat just behind them, a steady source of support. Shane held the microphone, his voice slow and steady. "I once believed my life had no place for family. I lived in fear of repeating the past, afraid of hurting others. But then these 2 children came into my life, and they changed everything." He paused, his eyes meeting Rosie's as she listened intently, then continued. "I found my family, and I want other children to have that same chance. That is why today, I am announcing the creation of the Hope Foundation." Behind him, a large banner was unveiled with bold letters, "Hope Foundation. Every child deserves a home." This foundation will support orphans, abandoned children, so they have shelter, education, and love. No child deserves to sleep on cardboard or live in fear when night falls. Thunderous applause filled the hall, lasting long. Some people wiped away tears. Even those who had doubted him now stood up, clapping in support. Rosie looked at him with eyes shining with pride. For the first time, she realized her story did not end with finding a home. It had opened a door of hope for many other children. That evening, after the event had ended, Rosie sat in the living room, carefully laying Ryan down in the crib. The baby slept peacefully, his breathing steady. Shane stood at the doorway, silently watching. Rosie turned back and asked in a small voice, "Dad, can I keep calling you that forever?" Shane bent down, resting his hand on her shoulder, his voice firm. "Not only can you must, because it is the truth." Rosie smiled, a smile mingled with tears. She knew she finally had a place where she belonged, a home no one could take away. Late at night, when the whole house was quiet, Shane still sat in the living room, the golden lamplight soft against his face. Through the doorway, he could see Rosie sleeping soundly on her bed, Ryan curled up in his crib. He whispered to himself, as if making a vow, "This is what home truly island." A gentle breeze drifted through the curtains, carrying the scent of flowers from the garden. Shane closed his eyes, feeling a peace he had never known. The sorrowful past had closed, and before him stretched a new beginning, where love had found its resting place and family was redefined by unconditional bond. A year had passed since the day Rosie trembled and called Shane Dad for the first time in the courtroom. 1 year was not long for the world, but for the 3 people under the Williams roof, it had been an entire journey of transformation. Early in the morning, as the sun rose, laughter spread across the garden behind the mansion. Ryan, now 18 months old, toddled across the grass, his chubby little legs wobbling, while Rosie ran behind him, arms stretched wide to catch her brother if he stumbled. "Careful, Ryan," she called, her voice filled with both worry and pride. Ryan wobbled, nearly falling onto the dew-covered grass, but Shane was there in time, scooping him up into his arms. The baby burst into laughter, burying his face against Shane's chest. Shane laughed too, his eyes shining with something he had never known before: peace. Helen stood on the porch, smiling as she watched. She said nothing, only nodded to herself, thinking how rare it was to see the master of the house so radiant. Jonah, now close to the children, sat trimming roses, occasionally whistling and calling Ryan by the teasing nickname, Little Master. Rosie, after a year, had changed so much. Her long hair had been cut neatly, her face no longer gaunt from those wandering days. She had returned to school in town. At first, Rosie feared her classmates would whisper about the old rumors, but Shane's patience helped her slowly regain her confidence. In the evenings, Shane sat with Rosie as she did her homework. He was no great teacher, but he patiently read each page with her. One night, Rosie laughed when she saw Shane frown, struggling to recall a third-grade math formula. "Dad forgot too?" Rosie asked, her eyes bright. "Yes, but I'll relearn it with you," Shane answered firmly. In that moment, she understood. A father did not need to know everything. He only needed to be willing to sit beside his child and never walk away. The Hope Foundation, the charity Shane had announced the previous year, was now a real presence. A small house on the edge of town had been renovated into a community center. Orphans and abandoned children came, received hot meals, clean clothes, and most importantly, someone to listen. On weekends, Rosie often went with Shane to the center. She helped hand out bread, pour milk, and played with the younger children. Every time she looked at them, she saw herself a year earlier sitting on cardboard with Ryan in her arms, her eyes filled with fear whenever someone approached. One day, a little girl of about 6 clutched Rosie's skirt and whispered, "Sis, will you leave me too?" Rosie froze. She bent down, hugged the girl, and murmured, "Number, I won't leave you." From a distance, Shane watched, his heart aching yet swelling with pride. He realized Rosie was not only healing, she was becoming a bridge to help others heal. Of course, not everything was smooth. Old wounds still surfaced. Some nights Rosie dreamed of Uncle Thomas's cold knock on the door, of Aunt Veronica's false tears. She would wake, drenched in cold sweat. But each time, Shane was there. He sat beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and reassured her, "You're not out there anymore. You're home, with me." Just those 4 words, "you're home," were enough for Rosie to curl into his arms and find calm again. As for Thomas and Veronica, after being fined for perjury, they slowly disappeared from town. Old gossip faded like smoke. People no longer spoke of Shane Williams with suspicion, but with respect. A year later, in the small town, everyone had grown used to the sight of a millionaire who was no longer cold, but often seen with 2 children. He carried Ryan in the supermarket, while Rosie ran ahead to pick her favorite cookies. He sat in a cafe, sipping coffee while Rosie did her homework, and Ryan scribbled with crayons. Once, an elderly couple approached Rosie and said, "You have such a beautiful smile, you know. It reminds us of our daughter when she was little." Rosie blushed, glancing at Shane. He only ruffled her hair and replied for her, "This girl is the light of my home now." On New Year's Eve, the fire crackled in the fireplace, the scent of cinnamon filling the house. Rosie sat writing thank you cards to those who had supported the Hope Foundation. Ryan crawled on the rug, clutching a new teddy bear. Shane sat with a book, occasionally lifting his eyes just to watch the 2 children. When the clock struck 12, fireworks lit up the sky outside. Rosie ran to Shane, hugged him, and exclaimed, "Happy New Year, Dad." Ryan swayed and babbled, "Da, happy." Shane burst out laughing, holding them both close. In that instant, he whispered, his voice trembling with happiness, "This is truly home, and this is our first year as a family." Their lives still had many roads ahead, but one thing was certain, they were no longer alone. Every step of Rosie and Ryan, every tear and every smile, carved a new meaning into the heart of the man who had once been cold. And when night fell, the mansion on the hill was no longer the empty house of a lonely millionaire. It had become a home where love was written from the ashes of the past, spreading outward to shine light on many other lives. At this point, the journey of the story has come to an end, but its echoes will surely linger in our hearts. From the image of a little girl trembling as she held her baby brother on a piece of cardboard, to the moment she was finally given a real home, one truth stands clear. No matter how much evil hides behind lies, it will always be exposed and punished, while good people, with their sincere hearts, will always be rewarded. This is not only a story about a millionaire rediscovering a heart that had been shut away, or about two children finding a new home, but also a message for all of us. In the darkness, just one extended hand, just one small ray of light, can be enough to change an entire life. My dear friends, after following these heartwarming stories, these moving tales that Story 4 Heart has brought to you today, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a story where, in the end, the good were finally rewarded? If you were in Rosie's place, what do you think you would do? And if you were Shane, would you have the courage to open your heart and protect someone else? Before you leave, let me ask you a small question. Are you doing okay today? If you are going through something difficult, feel free to share a few words, because here we always have each other. See you again in the next stories from Story 4 Heart, where together we will keep spreading love and the belief that no matter how harsh the world may seem, goodness will always prevail. The 6-year-old girl accidentally dropped a cup, her small foot scraped by the broken pieces, yet her stepmother scolded her harshly and forced her to press her face against the curtain as she sobbed. No one came to help her until her millionaire father unexpectedly returned home after a business trip. He stepped inside and shouted one sentence that left the entire house in complete silence. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell me which city you are watching from. Now, let's start the story. The afternoon in the Oak Ridge mansion was so quiet that the sound of the wind slipping through the glass windows could be heard. Inside, the polished living room reflected the hesitant steps of a little girl. It was Sophia Miller, a 6-year-old in a simple pale pink dress, her clear eyes always carrying a shadow of longing. Sophia's mother had died of illness when she was only 2, and the memory of her existed only in faint fragments. Since then, the greatest desire in Sophia's heart had been to have a mother to hold her, to hear gentle words of praise. Her father, Jonathan Miller, was a successful businessman, constantly away on business trips. 5 months earlier, he had remarried Victoria Blake, a young woman who once worked as a receptionist at his company. On the wedding day, Victoria carried a sweet appearance, always smiling at Sophia, even softly patting her head and calling her, "my sweet little girl." Innocently, Sophia believed that was the love she had always wished for. But when Jonathan was not home, that sweetness vanished. Victoria gradually revealed her bitter and cold nature, seeing Sophia as a burden, as a shadow of the late wife she wanted to erase. That afternoon, Sophia tried to do something very simple: wash a glass and carry it into the living room. She believed that if she behaved well and worked hard, maybe her stepmother would be pleased. Her small hands were still wet, and the glass slipped in a brief loss of control. The sharp sound of shattering filled the room, glass scattered across the tiled floor. One shard cut into Sophia's foot, and a thin line of red spread across the wound. Sophia panicked, dropped to her knees, clutching her foot, tears welling up. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." The click of high heels struck the floor with chilling precision. Victoria appeared at the staircase, her tight red dress accentuating her haughty look, but her eyes were blazing with fury. The face carefully made up was now twisted in anger. Her shrill voice echoed through the room. "This house is no place for a clumsy little brat like you. Look at what you've done, Sophia. You're useless." Startled, Sophia hugged her foot tighter, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. She still tried to plead, her voice faint. "Please don't be mad. I'll pick it all up. I'll clean everything. I promise." Victoria stepped closer, never once glancing at the blood on the child's leg. She pointed straight at Sophia, her voice sharp. "Kalate. Sorry? Does saying sorry make the cup whole again? Useless girl. Always clumsy, always making me look bad. I told you to behave properly, but you keep acting out and then pretend to cry so your father will pity you. Pathetic child." Sophia trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks. She staggered to her feet, each small step dragging across the cold tile floor, leaving a trail of red behind her. The heavy curtain blocked the light, and in its shadow she pressed herself close, her shoulders shaking violently. Her sobs broke into gasps, tangled with fear and despair. In her tiny heart, Sophia kept telling herself, "If I were better, if I hadn't broken the cup, maybe Mama would love me." Sophia quickly shook her head, a tear sliding down her cheek as she whispered in a tiny voice, "I don't want Daddy to be upset. I just want you to be happy, Mama." Victoria folded her arms, her lips curling into a cold smile, her eyes fixed on the small trembling back. Her voice hissed again. "Happy? You think looking like this can win me over? Don't dream. A girl like you will always be a burden. Get up. Face the wall now." The little hand slipped away from her wound, trembling. Sophia staggered upright. The small cut made every step painful, each one leaving a damp, smudged mark on the floor. She walked slowly toward the thick curtain in the living room, pressing her face against it, her shoulders heaving with sobs. Her broken voice blended with her crying. "Please don't punish me today. My foot hurts so much. Please, Mama." Just then, the sound of the front door echoed through the house. Steady, heavy footsteps of a man carried down the hallway. A familiar voice, weary yet warm, called out, "Sophia, are you home?" Jonathan Miller had just returned from a long business trip. He was dressed in a dark suit, holding tightly to a brand new white teddy bear. It was the gift he had picked out at the airport, hoping to make up for the days he had been away. As he stepped into the living room, the sight before him froze his body. His daughter, small and trembling, was standing with her face pressed to the curtain, her foot covered with scratches. In front of her, Victoria, in a tight red dress, was pointing her finger, her face twisted with rage, her words of scolding still hanging in the air. Jonathan froze for a few seconds. The white teddy bear slipped from his hand, rolled onto the chair, as if the shock itself had knocked it away. His heart pounded, caught between anger and anguish. In that instant, he understood that everything he had tried to believe in all this time had collapsed. Without another thought, Jonathan rushed forward and pulled Sophia away from the curtain. Her tiny hand was ice cold, trembling. He bent down and saw her feet covered in scratches, each step leaving a damp mark on the floor. Jonathan drew in a sharp breath, his voice low but commanding. "Victoria, stop right now." The sound cut through the air like a blade. Victoria flinched and spun around. For the first time in months, she failed to mask the twisted fury on her face. Her eyes flicked toward Jonathan, then quickly steadied as she forced her expression back into calm. "When did you get home?" Her voice was stiff at first, then dropped into a false softness. She was the one being careless. She needs to learn to obey. If you keep spoiling her, she'll never grow up. Sophia let out a choking sob and clung to her father's chest. Tears streamed down her face, her voice breaking into fragments as she whispered as if terrified of making him angrier. "Daddy, it's my fault. I shouldn't have broken the cup. I promise, I'll be better. Just please, don't let Mommy hate me anymore." Jonathan held his daughter tight, his hand pressing gently on her small shoulder as if to shield her from the whole world. His eyes locked on Victoria, each word striking with heavy weight. "You call this teaching? Leaving her in pain like this? She's only 6 years old, Victoria." Victoria let out a bitter laugh, her tone dripping with resentment. "You always take her side. I'm the one who lives with her every day. I'm the one who deals with her spilling things, making messes. What is wrong if I discipline her? And me, Jonathan, I am your wife. Am I worth less than a child?" Jonathan's brow furrowed, his chest rising and falling sharply. In that moment, memories flooded back, his wife passing when Sophia was only 2, leaving behind an endless void. He had thought remarrying would give his daughter someone to lean on, would make the house less cold. But now, he saw he had made a terrible mistake. Victoria's words pierced Jonathan's heart like a blade. He clutched his daughter closer, his face darkening. Rage erupted, his voice booming through the living room. "Shut up, Victoria. You were never her mother. Her mother would never punish her just for breaking a cup and then ignore her wound." That voice froze the entire room. Victoria stood motionless for a few seconds, her eyes wide, then quickly shifted into a look of hatred. Sophia trembled, perhaps for the first time in years, feeling her father's arms like a solid wall of protection. The once quiet mansion now echoed only with Jonathan's heavy breathing, Sophia's muffled sobs, and Victoria's eyes flooding with uncontrollable fury. Victoria pressed her lips together, her hand tightening into a fist, and in her gaze flashed a cold, sharp light, the sign of another storm about to break. Jonathan closed the office door, his arms still holding Sophia tightly. He set her down on the sofa and pressed a clean cloth gently against the scratch. His body trembled, and his deep, husky voice came out like a promise. "Daddy is here now. No one will hurt you anymore." Sophia pressed her face into her father's shoulder, her small breaths trembling with every beat. For the first time, she clearly felt his protection. Yet in her tearful eyes, another fear still gnawed at her. Her voice was faint, words breaking with a sob. "Daddy, what can I do so that stepmom won't hate me anymore? Why is it that the harder I try, the further she pushes me away?" Jonathan froze, his chest tightening. His eyes welled with tears, not knowing how to answer. His large hand gently squeezed her small shoulder, only a heavy sigh breaking the silence. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Henry, come right away. Sophia is hurt." About 15 minutes later, Dr. Henry Walker arrived. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair who had been close to the Miller family for many years. Carrying a small medical bag, his eyes filled with concern when he saw Sophia draw her leg in, the red scratch marking her skin. "It's not serious, just a shallow cut. But she needs rest and, more importantly, emotional care." Jonathan nodded, his gaze shifting from his daughter to the hallway. Victoria's figure appeared, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Her face was cold, her eyes flashing with anger. Jonathan stepped out, closing the door behind him to let Henry work. He stood facing Victoria, his voice lowered but weighted with authority. "She is my last boundary. You've already crossed the line." Victoria curled her lips into a bitter smile. "Boundary? I'm only teaching her. You always defend that girl, always put her above me. You should be thanking me for correcting her, instead of treating me like the enemy." Jonathan looked straight into her eyes, his voice dropping, every word heavy. "That is not teaching. That is cruelty." Victoria burst out laughing, the hollow sound echoing down the hall. "Cruelty? No, Jonathan. You're just afraid of losing your little doll that you used to make up for your dead wife. You don't truly love her, you're only trying to ease your own guilt." Jonathan clenched his fists, veins standing out on the back of his hand. In his eyes, anger swelled like a wave. He no longer saw a wife before him, only a stranger filled with malice. He turned back into the room. Sophia was having her wound bandaged by Henry, her eyes wet with tears though she tried to stifle her sobs. Jonathan swallowed hard, his hand tightening, his voice ringing with finality. "Tomorrow, I will end this marriage with you. I will not let my daughter live with you another second. We will divorce, and you will leave this house. Do not appear before her again." The next morning, Jonathan's study was heavy with silence. On the wooden desk, the divorce papers were already laid out. Jonathan sat across from Victoria, pen in hand. He didn't speak much, only looked straight into the eyes of the woman who had shared his life for the past 5 months. Victoria crossed her arms, her face void of emotion, yet at the corner of her lips lingered a faint smile full of defiance. Jonathan finished signing and pushed the papers toward her. Victoria slowly wrote her name, then set the pen down. Her cold gaze drifted past him to Sophia, who was sitting quietly on the chair next to her father. Before leaving the house, Victoria bent down, her voice low but hissing with venom. "Did you think you escaped me, Jonathan? You'll see, I'm not so easy to get rid of. Both you and that little girl will pay for this." The door slammed shut, leaving behind an icy emptiness. Jonathan gently squeezed Sophia's shoulder, but even he could feel unease spreading inside him. That afternoon, when the sun had softened, a knock sounded at the door. Jonathan opened it and saw Eleanor Brooks, the woman who lived next door. She was about 55, thin, her graying hair neatly tied back, a small box of freshly baked cookies in her hands. Eleanor had been a longtime neighbor, usually gentle, rarely interfering in anyone's affairs. But today, her eyes carried an unusual resolve. "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. I brought some cookies for Sophia." Her voice was soft, but hoarse, as if it had taken all her courage to speak. Jonathan invited her in. In the living room, Sophia sat curled up on the sofa, clutching a white teddy bear tightly in her arms. Seeing her like that made Eleanor's throat tighten, her eyes glistening. She walked slowly toward the child and set the cookie box on the table. "Sophia, I brought cookies. Would you like to try one?" Her voice trembled, though she tried to keep a gentle smile. Sophia looked up, her clear eyes filled with caution. She shook her head and hugged the stuffed bear tighter, as if afraid that if she let go, the only sense of safety she had would disappear. Eleanor turned to Jonathan, lowered her voice, almost to a whisper. "Mr. Miller, I have to be honest. I've seen, many times, Victoria yelling at the little girl. Once she even made her kneel outside in the cold. I thought about reporting it to the authorities, but I was afraid I didn't have enough proof. I'm sorry for staying silent for so long." Jonathan froze, a sting rising in his nose. His face sank under the weight of guilt, realizing he had let his daughter endure loneliness and suffering far more than he had ever imagined. Sophia heard it, her small shoulders trembling. She lifted her head, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes, though still hesitant. Her voice came out as soft as a breath. "Auntie, is it true you saw me being bad? Is that why Mom hates me?" Eleanor stopped short, tears filling her eyes. She sat down beside Sophia, took the child's tiny hand into her frail palms, and spoke with a trembling but steady voice. "No, sweetheart, you are a very good girl. The one who is wrong isn't you. It's the adult who treated you unfairly. You must remember, you deserve to be loved." Sophia looked at her, lips quivering, eyes shimmering with tears. She clutched the stuffed bear against her chest, and for the first time in many days, let a small smile appear, uncertain, but real. Jonathan sat across from them, quietly watching. He gave Eleanor a slight nod, thanking her with his eyes. Then he lowered his voice and admitted the fear that had been gnawing at him. "Thank you, but I'm afraid Victoria hasn't stopped yet." Eleanor stayed silent for a moment, then slowly nodded. In her eyes flashed a trace of fear, as though she sensed that somehow Victoria would find a way to return. That afternoon, when the Oak Ridge mansion had fallen silent again, after Victoria had quietly left, she did not return to her old home but instead rented a small apartment in a shabby neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Inside the narrow room, a dim yellow light cast shadows across her cold face. She wore a long black coat, sat upright, and her eyes carried both fury and calculation. The door creaked open. A large man with a scruffy beard and a wrinkled shirt stepped inside. It was Richard Hale, 40 years old, someone Victoria had once known through a gambling debt. He let out a mocking laugh, his voice rough and hoarse. "Out of money already, rich lady? You don't look any different from someone thrown out onto the street." Victoria clenched her teeth, forcing a smile, though the hatred in her eyes was clear. "You think I'm going to lose? Jonathan will be brought to his knees if Sophia disappears from his hands." Richard raised his eyebrows, sneering as if he had just heard a cheap joke. He pulled out a chair, dropped heavily into it, and leaned back. "You dare touch the girl? I thought all you knew how to do was parade around in that mansion." Before Victoria could respond, a knock echoed at the door. A woman walked in, her wavy brown hair cascading over her shoulders, lips painted a bold red, her gaze sharp though her voice dripped with sweetness. She was Melissa Grant, 35, a woman with a history tied to multiple financial fraud schemes. She sat down, crossed her legs, and spoke in a soft but calculating tone. "Why waste your breath arguing? I know how to make Jonathan open that safe without lifting a finger. The girl is the key. As long as we take her, Jonathan will pay whatever it takes. Victoria was silent for a moment, then nodded, her eyes flashing with malice. Richard slapped the table, chuckling darkly. Fine, this sounds like fun. I'll handle the men. Melissa will do the planning, and you just need to play the role of the abandoned stepmother. The three of them locked eyes, no further words needed. In that suffocating little room, a scheme had just been born. At the same time, at the Oak Ridge mansion, Jonathan sat across from Sophia in the dining room. Dinner was simpler than usual, lacking the extravagance of the meals when Victoria was there. On the table there was only pasta, a small salad, and a glass of milk. Jonathan tried to create a relaxed atmosphere, but his eyes often lingered on his daughter's face. Sophia held her fork, eating slowly. After a while, she looked up, her voice cautious. Dad, are you going on another business trip? Jonathan set his fork down and gently squeezed his daughter's hand. He looked straight into her eyes, his voice slow but firm. No, this time I will stay. I won't let you be alone anymore. Sophia lowered her head, pressing her lips together. Then suddenly, she smiled faintly, a fragile smile that still lit up the quiet room. Jonathan tightened his hold on her hand, a determination rising in him stronger than ever before. In the dim corner of a bar near downtown, Richard Hale picked up the phone, his voice low and steady. Tomorrow night, we begin. At that very moment, Jonathan was watching Sophia sleep peacefully on the sofa, completely unaware that the real storm was quietly drawing near. That night, when Sophia had fallen asleep, Jonathan tucked the blanket around her and stood silently, his phone lying idle in his thoughts. Somewhere else, Richard closed his own phone. While here, Jonathan drew the curtains tighter. The next morning, the doorbell rang. Jonathan set down his coffee cup and went to open the door. Standing before him was a woman with neatly tied black hair, calm eyes, and a badge in her hand. I am Detective Maria Santos, Child Protection and Criminal Investigation Division. She introduced herself briefly, her voice clear and steady. I received information regarding psychological abuse and threats. I want to hear directly from you and any witnesses if possible. Jonathan invited her in. Sophia was sitting at the dining table, holding a colored pencil, glancing occasionally at the stranger. Jonathan gave a concise account of what had happened, the divorce, and the threats Victoria had left behind before leaving. Maria took notes, occasionally looking up to ask for details, her manner never cold but measured, making those across from her feel reassured. A second knock came at the door. Eleanor Brooks stepped inside, holding a box of cookies. She hesitated slightly when she saw the woman in plain clothes but carrying a badge. Jonathan gave her a nod to reassure her. Maria invited her to sit down and opened her notebook. Eleanor looked at Sophia first, her gaze warm as if asking permission, then turned to Maria and took a deep breath. I know she is capable of doing something even more terrible, the child. She needs protection. Maria nodded, her tone low but firm. I will not allow this to happen again, but I need solid evidence. Any recordings, photos, other neighbors who can confirm. Can you help me connect with them? Eleanor nodded immediately. I'll speak with the Parkers across the street. They once saw the little girl being forced to kneel outside in the yard. She turned to Jonathan. If necessary, I will testify. Sophia watched the adults talking, her hand still moving the pencil across the paper. She drew a white bear, then added two long dark shadows standing behind it. When she finished, she quietly brought the sheet of paper and placed it in front of Jonathan. Daddy, look! Jonathan looked at the drawing. The white bear stood upright, and before it were two blurry dark figures. A chill ran down his spine. He held his breath, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. You draw beautifully. But inside, a deeper unease settled. Maria bent down to look, asking nothing more about the picture. Instead, she spoke softly to Sophia. Can you show me the places where you usually sit to study, or where you open the windows? I need to check the safety inside the house. Sophia nodded and led Maria around. Maria quickly checked the locks, the window frames, the hallway cameras. She noted the blind spots and instructed Jonathan to add extra locks to the children's room windows. Before leaving, Maria stood in the doorway, giving short, precise reminders. My phone is always on. If you notice any unusual sign, call immediately. Tonight, keep the backyard well lit. I'll have patrols pass by more often." Evening settled in. Jonathan called a handyman to install extra locks on the second-floor windows. Sophia sat at her desk doing homework, her pencil gliding across the page, pausing now and then to listen to the drilling in the hallway. Eleanor stopped by briefly, bringing a list of 2 neighbors willing to testify. Jonathan thanked her and carefully placed it into the case file. Night fell, and the house grew quiet. Jonathan made hot cocoa, planning to bring it upstairs for his daughter. Upstairs, Sophia bent over her spelling assignment. A faint click sounded at the window frame. She looked up. The outside breeze pushed lightly against the curtain edge. The window latch seemed not fully shut. Sophia walked closer, intending to pull it closed, when she saw a folded piece of paper lying squarely on her desk, as if someone had slipped it past the curtain and let it fall. Her small hand hesitated. Sophia looked around, the room silent, except for the ticking clock. She bit her lip and opened it slightly. The bold letters were short and cold. "Don't lose the girl, or you will regret it." Sophia's throat tightened. She placed the paper down and stepped back, her eyes fixed on the desk as if afraid the words might leap off and speak aloud. She did not know whether to call out or keep quiet so her father would not worry. She drew in a breath, still undecided, when the bedroom door opened. Jonathan appeared holding the cup of cocoa. He smiled, but his eyes were immediately drawn to the sheet of paper on the desk. He set the cup down, picked up the note, read it once, then again, as if refusing to believe what he saw. The color drained from his face. Jonathan snapped his head up, looking at Sophia, then at the window latch left ajar. His hand crushed the paper until it crumpled. He spun around and ran into the hallway, his voice calling down the stairs, tense but controlled. "Sophia, stay right there. Eleanor, are you still nearby? Maria, I need you here right now." Jonathan clutched the paper tightly in his hand, speaking on the phone while hurrying down the stairs. In less than 20 minutes, the doorbell rang. Maria Santos stepped in with a man in a dark shirt, his frame solid, his eyes sharp and observant. "This is Officer Kyle Bennett," Maria introduced briefly. "My partner, in charge of technical work and surveillance." Jonathan didn't waste words. He handed the paper over immediately. Maria put on gloves, read slowly, nodded once, then looked up. "This is not an empty threat. They have already started the plan." Kyle moved closer to the second-floor window, inspecting the latch and the edge of the curtain, his voice low. "There are faint fingerprints, probably left with gloves. The latch is newly installed but has already been tampered with. They know this house." Jonathan poured coffee, but his hands were trembling. He sat down, the hot cup in his hands offering no comfort. "Whatever they want, I will give, as long as Sophia is safe." Maria shook her head, her voice firm yet calm. "No, you cannot show weakness. Money will only make them come back. We will set a trap to catch them once and for all. Tomorrow night you follow the schedule I arrange, and leave the rest to us." Jonathan looked straight at her. "What do you need me to do?" "First, turn on all the backyard lights at a fixed hour, then switch them off at exactly 11 p.m. to create a false blind spot," Maria explained, writing notes while pointing at the house diagram Kyle had pulled up on the tablet. "Second, move Sophia to the study instead of her bedroom, but keep the hallway light on upstairs as usual. Third, attach a silent alarm to this window. The alarm will notify the patrol car without making any sound inside the house," Kyle added. "We'll place hidden cameras on the back porch and in the planter. If anyone breaks in, we'll close the net within 30 seconds." The sound of small footsteps touched the stairs. Sophia stood at the bottom step, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes wide. She had heard a few words, her voice trembling. "Daddy, what if they take me away?" Jonathan stepped over, kneeling down to meet her gaze. He pulled Sophia into his arms, holding her as if to shield her from any storm. "No one will touch you as long as I'm standing here." Maria came closer, lowering her voice, her smile gentle yet serious. "Sophia, I need you to help me with something small. Tomorrow night, if you hear your dad say the words, 'lights on,' you will sit down on the chair and count your breaths with him, all right? 1, 2, 3, up to 10. While you count, we'll be doing our part." Sophia nodded, breathing deeply in rhythm with Maria. The little girl's face was still tense, but she had something to cling to now. Jonathan looked at his daughter, his gaze softening, then hardening again as he turned back to Maria. "I will follow every step exactly." Maria slipped the paper into her file folder and gave a quick instruction. "Tonight, lock the windows twice. Do not open them unless you hear the password. Any strange noise, call me first. Do not go outside alone." Kyle installed the silent alarm and double-checked the cameras. Before leaving, Maria touched Jonathan's shoulder lightly, as if passing on a promise. "We are very close by. Don't face this alone." Night fell thick over the other side of the city. In a gray-painted room, Richard Hale spread a map of Jonathan's neighborhood across the table. He slid his finger toward the back door, his mouth curving in a faint grin. "This way. I tested the lock yesterday. At 11, the hallway lights go out. The backyard is dark. The left fence is easy to climb." Melissa Grant sat across from him, laptop open, one earbud in. She was checking through disposable cell phones and a new SIM card. "I'll send the message at the right time. One number, one demand. He'll know he can't call the police. Everything clean, no trace." In the corner of the room, Victoria sat silently, back pressed against the chair, her hands clutching a worn ring. Hatred flickered like fire in her eyes. "Make it quick. I don't want to see his face for more than a minute." Richard glanced over, his smile dry. "Calm down, lady. Your money will be in your pocket. As for more than a minute, leave that to me." Melissa closed her laptop and stood up, her voice sweet but chilling. "The exit route is ready. Car parked behind the old warehouse row. Each of us has one task, no improvising." Richard tightened his grip on the folding knife, then tossed it back onto the table again, a restless habit. But his voice came sharp, final, stripped of any ornament. "Tomorrow night, the girl will be ours." It was 5 minutes to 11. Jonathan put on his coat, kissed Sophia on the forehead, then pressed the car lock outside in the yard, deliberately making the sound loud. He drove out the front gate as planned, circled slowly, then turned into the back alley where Officer Kyle Bennett was already waiting. Jonathan returned through the side entrance, stepping quietly into the study on the first floor. Sophia was already sitting in the armchair, holding her teddy bear, her eyes fixed on her father. In the hallway, the lights upstairs remained on as usual. In the darkness of the back garden, Detective Maria Santos signaled for the ambush team to spread out. Next to her stood Sergeant David Cho, the arrest team leader, solid in build, his voice short and calm. "Hold position. Wait for the signal." Kyle made a final check of the hidden camera in the flower bed and the silent alarm set by the window of the old classroom. Jonathan sat down, pulling the chair closer to his daughter. He whispered, his hand resting on her back to steady her breathing. "All you need to do is trust me." Sophia nodded ever so slightly. "Dad, I'm scared." "And I'm not," he said slowly, "because I'm here with you." The side gate gave a faint creak. A shadow slid over the fence. Then a second. Maria nodded at Cho. Inside, Sophia heard the wind slipping through a crack. She gripped her teddy bear's ears tighter. Jonathan gently touched her shoulder. "Lights on." Sophia began to count silently in her head as they had practiced, each breath steady and slow. At the back door, the lock clicked. The door opened just enough for Richard Hale to slip in first. Melissa Grant followed closely, her perfume sharp in the air. Victoria Blake came half a beat later, hood pulled low, her eyes flashing with bitter malice. Melissa whispered, "Hurry, before he comes back." Victoria leaned closer, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. "That child, she's going to pay." They crept along the back hallway like shadows sliding across the floor. Richard stopped at the threshold of the study, peering inside. In the warm yellow glow of the desk lamp, all he could see was Sophia's small back and the silhouette of her father leaning over her. He raised his hand to signal. 3 steps. 2. 1. Just as Richard's fingertips brushed the edge of the chair, Jonathan snapped his head up. He pulled Sophia tightly into his arms while pressing the button hidden under the table. The lights around the house burst on as if it were midday. Maria's voice thundered from the back porch. "Police! Don't move." At the same time, the silent alarm triggered the signal. Cho's team stormed through the back door, and 2 more officers flanked the side hallway. Richard staggered back, but it was already too late. Kyle slammed him to the floor, the cuffs locking around his wrists with a metallic snap. Melissa retreated toward the kitchen, her hand fumbling inside her bag, but a female officer blocked her path, her voice sharp and commanding. "Drop it!" The second pair of cuffs clicked shut. Victoria froze for 2 seconds, then bolted toward the half-open window as if to escape. Maria was already waiting, striking her arm aside and pinning her against the wall. "It's over, Victoria." Sophia trembled uncontrollably, the counting in her mind shattering apart. Jonathan held her closer, bending over to shield almost her entire body with his own. "It's over, sweetheart. You did so well." Her ragged breathing slowly steadied, her small hands clutching the fabric of her father's suit. Richard was yanked to his feet, his face twisted in fury, his eyes cutting toward Victoria as if to lay all blame on her. Melissa bit down on her lip, avoiding Maria's piercing stare. Victoria turned her head, her hood slipping back to reveal a face contorted with rage. She screamed, her voice tearing through the air. "I will not let you get away with this." The handcuffs tightened. The patrol lights swept across the road. Richard, Melissa, and Victoria were escorted out of the mansion, while Jonathan stood on the porch holding Sophia, pressing her close to his chest until the sound of sirens faded away. The next morning, the case files were transferred to the prosecutor. A few days later, the court set the trial date at Manhattan Family Court. The courtroom lights were bright. On the right side was the prosecution's table. On the left, the defendant's bench. On the raised platform, Judge Patricia Coleman appeared, around 60 years old, straight-backed with a clear voice, known for her integrity. She scanned the room, tapped the gavel lightly. "Begin." Detective Maria Santos presented first. She stood tall, file open, her voice steady but firm. Maria recounted the investigation process, the setup of the trap, the placement of cameras, the silent alarm, then pressed play on a recording taken from a burner phone used by Richard. Through the speakers, his voice was hoarse and curt. 11 o'clock, back door. The girl is the key." The entire courtroom went silent. Maria closed the device and added, "We recovered gloves, lockpicking tools, and an escape route plan. The intent to extort is undeniable." Next was Eleanor Brooks. She stepped onto the witness stand, tissue in hand, took a deep breath, then looked toward Sophia sitting beside Jonathan. Her voice trembled but did not break. "I saw Victoria leave the little girl outside in the cold, many times. One day, the child had to kneel for a long time just because she spilled water. I stayed silent too long, afraid I had no solid proof. Today, I cannot stay silent anymore." She handed the court clerk 2 written statements from the Parker and Diaz households next door. Judge Coleman nodded, accepted them, and made quick notes. The defense attorney tried to cut in, questioning viewing distance, questioning the lighting at night, but Eleanor answered clearly. Maria supplemented with patrol times and neighborhood camera images that matched the account. The chain of evidence tightened link by link. Jonathan was called. He stood, his hand still resting on his daughter's shoulder like a new habit, then walked to the stand. He gave a concise account of the divorce signing day, of Victoria's threats, of the anonymous note left in Sophia's room. When the prosecutor asked, Jonathan looked directly at Victoria, his voice dropping. "I tried to believe in a peaceful family, but what you did to my daughter was never discipline." He paused a moment, then spoke each word distinctly. "You were never a mother, and you never will be." Victoria leaned back in her chair, giving a dry laugh, her red lips twitching slightly. "You'll regret turning your back on me. You have no idea who you've just crossed." Her eyes darted quickly over the spectators, searching for something to cling to, but she found nothing except cold stares. The prosecutor's closing words were brief. "Conspiracy to extort, unlawful entry, endangering the safety of a minor, all organized and with an escape route prepared." The defense rambled about impulsive motives, about how no harm was done yet, but the physical evidence was already on the table. The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the sound of the gavel. Judge Coleman adjusted her glasses and delivered the verdict, her voice not loud but firm. This court finds the defendants, Victoria Blake, Richard Hale, and Melissa Grant, guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping for extortion, unlawful entry, and endangering a child. Based on the evidence and consistent testimony, the court hereby declares. She paused for a moment, glanced at the defendants, then brought the gavel down. Guilty. Sentenced to multiple years in prison, according to the sentencing guidelines for each defendant. A long-term protective order is granted for Sophia Miller. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck, sharp and final. Court officers escorted the 3 defendants out through the back door. Richard lowered his eyes. Melissa kept her head bowed, while Victoria looked back, her gaze still full of resentment, but with nothing left to hold on to. Jonathan returned to his seat. Sophia stood, clutching her father's hand tightly. Her face still showed traces of tension after the long wait, but her eyes were no longer as lost. She looked up and whispered, her voice so soft it seemed afraid of breaking something fragile. "Daddy, are we really a family now?" Jonathan bent down, pressing his forehead gently against hers. He closed his eyes, drawing in a long breath, as if to gather everything that had just happened: the recordings, the testimony, the gavel's echo, and the tiny hands that now needed a new promise. His throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but the words had not yet found their way out. The sound of the gavel still echoed in his memory when Jonathan bent down, pressing his forehead against his daughter's. He did not speak right away, only held Sophia's hand tightly and guided her out of the courtroom, each step slow but steady. In the hallway, he leaned closer and whispered, his voice steadier after such a long silence. "Daddy heard you, sweetheart. From today, I will answer with actions." A few months later, Jonathan's work schedule became lighter. He handed more projects to his associates, personally drove Sophia to school, came home in time for dinner, and at night sat beside her reading books. That morning, father and daughter went to their scheduled therapy session with Dr. Leah Simmons. She was around 40, a child psychologist, her warm voice and steady gaze giving those in front of her a sense of safety. The therapy room was simple, with a shelf of colored pencils and a few notebooks. "Doctor," Leah sat across from Sophia, her smile gentle. "Today, why don't you try to tell your story in writing? It doesn't have to be perfect, just honest." She slid a blue-covered notebook toward the girl. Sophia held the pen, glanced at her father. Jonathan gave a small nod. She bent her head, writing slowly, pausing a few times to take deep breaths. After a while, she pushed the notebook toward Dr. Leah. On the page, in neat handwriting, were the words, "I'm not afraid anymore." "Doctor." Leah looked at Jonathan, then back at Sophia, her eyes warming visibly. "Thank you, sweetheart. That sentence is powerful." She turned to Jonathan. "You are doing the right things. Children trust the rhythm of consistency, being picked up every day, eating together, hearing the truth. Keep it that way." On the way home, in the car, Sophia hugged the notebook to her chest. She turned to her father. "Do you think I spelled anything wrong?" Jonathan smiled and shook his head. "Not a single word was wrong." She let out a small laugh, clear and brief, but bright enough to light up the whole car. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Eleanor Brooks came in carrying a tray of butter cookies. The warm smell filled the living room as she stepped inside. Sophia ran to her and wrapped her arms around her. "You came just in time to fill a big empty spot at our dinner table," Jonathan teased gently. Eleanor laughed, looking at the two of them, her eyes moist but joyful. "That kind of empty space only needs flour and love to be full." They sat together, eating cookies while drawing. Sophia picked up a pen and sketched a white bear, this time standing in the middle of an open doorway, with golden light shining outside. Eleanor tilted her head. "Your bear looks stronger." Sophia nodded, grinning. "Because it has a home." At night, the simple meal felt warm, no longer suffocated by silence. Jonathan poured sauce over his daughter's food, poured milk with his own hands, then sat down beside her instead of staying glued to his phone as before. Sophia reached for the teddy bear on the chair and placed it on the table, serious as if setting a place for a family member. She looked up, her eyes shining. "Our family is complete now, Dad." Jonathan stared at her for a long time. In that moment, All the days of racing after work, the nights of coming home late, the misplaced trust in another adult, came together into a quiet resolve. He wrapped his arm around his daughter, his voice low but steady. "I will be here, and I will never leave." After dinner, the two stepped out onto the porch, the yellow light spilling gently across the steps. A passing breeze stirred the wind chime into a soft tune. Jonathan opened the blue-covered notebook and set it on Sophia's lap. "Do you want to write anything more?" She shook her head, hugging the teddy bear to her chest, resting her head against his shoulder. "I've written enough." A little later, Eleanor rose to say goodbye. She paused at the door, turned back to look at the father and daughter, and smiled as if laying down a heavy stone. "It feels so warm tonight." Jonathan nodded. "Thank you for being here all this time." She waved her hand. When adults stand where they should, children will always find their way home. The door closed. The house fell quiet. Jonathan looked at Sophia and spoke softly, as if promising himself. "Tomorrow, we'll plant another flower pot on the porch. Our home needs more green." Sophia nodded, her eyes sparkling. "I want white daisies." Before bedtime, Jonathan pulled the blanket over her, turned off the bedside lamp, and stayed a while longer. Sophia turned on her side and whispered, as though afraid to break the peace they had just built. "I already have light now, Dad." Jonathan smiled, placing his hand on her forehead. "Keep it, and if it ever dims, I'll light it again." At the foot of the bed, the teddy bear sat upright, its round black eyes reflecting a faint glow from the lamp. Outside, the city still roared, but inside this house, the rhythm of breathing was steady. A family was slowly learning how to be together again, clear, deliberate, and whole. 3 years later, on a chilly autumn morning in Oak Ridge, the kitchen window was slightly open. The faint smell of burnt butter mingled with the aroma of coffee. Jonathan turned the pancake just in time so it wouldn't burn, then set it on a plate and poured a little syrup over it. Sophia, now 9 years old, her hair neatly tied back, a name tag pinned to her sweater for the school art fair, sat at the table painting the final strokes on a small canvas. A white bear appeared in the corner of the yard, behind it an open doorway, and inside, a dining table with two people sitting across from each other. She stopped, tilted her head to study the picture, then smiled to herself. Jonathan placed the plate down. "A family-themed piece?" Sophia nodded. "I changed the title. Now it's called The Door with the Light On." "That's beautiful," Jonathan said, pulling up a chair beside her. He had kept the habit of asking her about every detail of her day, from art class to reading assignments. His schedule had become steady, mornings driving her to school, quick meetings at noon, coming home early to cook dinner, evenings reading, weekends volunteering at the community center. The Lighthouse Foundation he had established 3 years earlier now ran safety skills classes for children, parenting workshops, and a free counseling hotline. Maria occasionally taught classes, Eleanor managed the pastry table at every event, and Dr. Leah led the art therapy group on Thursdays. The doorbell rang. The mail carrier handed him a thick envelope stamped by the Department of Corrections. Jonathan stood on the porch, his fingers tightening around the edge of the paper. It was something he knew would arrive, yet each time he opened it, it felt like touching an old scar. He inhaled deeply, tore it open, and scanned quickly. A notice of a victim impact review ahead of the scheduled parole hearing for one of the 3 convicts. Nothing surprising, just another part of the legal process. Still, his chest sank for a moment. Sophia appeared at the doorway, holding her painting, her eyes moving from the letter to her father. "What is it?" Jonathan didn't hide it. "A court notice. They want to hear from people who were affected. I'll go with Miss Maria. You don't need to worry." She set the painting down, thought for a moment, then asked softly, not with the fear of years past, but with the honesty of a child who had learned to speak her mind. "Are you tired, Dad?" Jonathan gave a faint smile. "Yes, but even tired I'll go, because I go to close some doors and to open others." He tapped the edge of the letter lightly, then folded it. "And I go to tell them that our house still keeps its light on." The school art fair bustled with children's music and bursts of laughter. Sophia placed her painting on the stand and clipped her name tag beside it. Eleanor arrived early, carrying a basket of cookies. Her eyes widened when she saw the painting. An open door like this means the light is welcome inside. Then she set her dish nearby and whispered like sharing a secret. "I'll put a plate of cookies under the spotlight. Cookies need a little light too." Dr. Leah also stopped by. She wore a cardigan and a badge that read volunteer. She bent down to Sophia's eye level. "Do you remember the sentence you wrote last time?" "I'm not afraid anymore," Sophia answered, her voice steadier than 3 years ago. "Right. And when someday you feel a little afraid again, what will you do?" "I tell Dad. I breathe with you. I draw another doorway." All three of them laughed together. "Doctor," Leah gently touched the girl's shoulder. "Very good." A smaller girl, about 6 years old, stood staring at Sophia's painting. Her mother was at the registration desk holding a lighthouse flyer. The girl pointed to the white bear. Sophia bent down. "Do you like bears?" The child nodded. "I just came here. I didn't bring anything." The simple words carried a weight Sophia understood instantly. She glanced at her own teddy bear tucked inside her backpack, one ear worn, Eleanor's little stitch still showing. Sophia opened the bag, hugged the bear for a second, then placed it in the other girl's hands. "His name is Milo," Sophia said. "He knows the way home, but he likes to stay with someone who needs him." The girl hugged the bear tightly, her eyes shining. "My name is Mia." Jonathan stood a few steps away, watching without stepping in. Some moments were better left to grow in silence. He simply lifted his phone to take a picture, then slipped it into his pocket, as if storing a fragment of time. The following afternoon, Jonathan and Maria went to court. It was not a trial, just a review session, in a smaller room with softer light. The coordinator, Counselor Janet Reed, about 50 years old, specialized in working with victims' families. She explained the procedures, how statements would be recorded. Her steady, warm tone made the tense room feel less confining. Maria rested her hand on the case folder. "When you're ready, just speak the way you do at home with your daughter." Jonathan looked at the sheet of notes in front of him, a few scribbled lines, but when he opened his mouth, he did not read. He spoke about the night the lights came on, about the threatening note, about the child's hand gripping his as they counted breaths. He did not name names, did not accuse. He only spoke of what was taken away and what his family had done to rebuild. He ended with a short sentence. "Our home still keeps its lights on, and it will keep shining. I hope the justice system shines enough to make sure no child ever goes through this again." Counselor Janet wrote notes, nodded. "Thank you. Your words will be part of the record." Leaving the courthouse, Maria slipped her hands into her coat pockets, her breath turning into thin clouds in the cool air. "You were concise and clear. Good." Then she tilted her head, narrowing her eyes in a playful tease. "Tonight, don't work. You already have a house with lights on." "Got it," Jonathan replied, half smiling, half relieved. That evening, the porch light glowed warm. Eleanor set fresh baked pastries on the table, chuckling when she noticed Sophia did not hand her the bear to hug as usual. The girl explained about Mia. "I lent it to her, but I think maybe Milo wants to stay with her longer." Eleanor looked at Jonathan, then back at Sophia. "Then I'll help you sew a new coat for Milo to send along to Mia." "With your old blue floral fabric?" Sophia asked, her eyes lighting up. "Yes, because things that once kept us safe will keep protecting others." Jonathan sat down, pulling his chair closer. "Tomorrow, we'll bring Milo's new coat and a basket of pastries. But tonight..." He poured milk and set it before his daughter. "Tonight we'll have a small celebration. For a new doorway." Sophia bit into a pastry, frowning thoughtfully as if choosing her words. "A doorway has light from both sides, from outside in and from inside out." She looked up at her father. "I think our house already knows how to keep the lights on." Jonathan laughed, nodding. "You said it better than I could." Night settled. After Eleanor left, Jonathan and Sophia sat on the porch. The breeze was gentle, the wind chimes clicking softly. Sophia rested her head on her father's shoulder. "Are you still worried about court?" "Yes," Jonathan admitted. "I worry, but I'm not afraid. Because fear is darkness, and worry still means the light can stay on. Then I'll worry with you. Just a little." Jonathan placed his hand on her forehead. "Just a little." Inside the house, the blue-covered notebook lay open. Sophia picked up a pen, and added a line beneath her old words. "I'm not afraid anymore, and if fear comes back one day, I will turn the light on." She set the pen down, blew gently to dry the ink, then handed the notebook to her father. Jonathan read, his eyes softening with a quiet warmth. "This sentence will stay with us for a long time." "Like Milo," Sophia said, then corrected herself. "Like Mia." They turned off the porch light, but the lights inside the house stayed bright. Near the door, the painting "The Doorway with Lights On" had just been hung, framed in wood Jonathan had built the weekend before. In the painting, the little white bear now wore a blue scarf. In the bottom right corner, Sophia signed her name, adding a tiny dot. 3 years passed, and that small dot perhaps became a reminder. We walked through the dark without losing the way home. And every night, if something pressed on the heart, one could still do something simple: turn on the light, pour the milk, call each other by name, then whisper like a new habit learned. The story ends with the light of love, but it also opens up a lesson that each of us needs to remember. The wicked will eventually be punished, and the good will always be rewarded. Victoria, Richard, and Melissa paid the price for their greed and cruelty, while Sophia finally found a true home with a father who awakened to his responsibilities and dared to protect his daughter with all his love. That is the noble message that Story 4 Heart wants to share with you. Nothing is stronger than love, and nothing is more steadfast than justice. No matter how long the darkness lasts, the light will always appear in the end to warm the hearts of the small and fragile. And now, I want to hear from you, our dear audience of Story 4 Heart. If you were in Sophia's place, would you have the courage to believe in the light ahead? And if you were Jonathan, would you dare to let go of work in order to fully embrace the role of a father? What do you think about Victoria's ending? Did she deserve what she got for all she had done? And do you believe that as long as we choose love, happiness will always return to us, no matter what pain we have endured? Finally, may I ask you something? Where are you listening to this story right now? Are you at home or on your way back from work? I hope you feel warmth in your heart and gain new faith after accompanying us through today's story. Thank you for staying until the very end with Story 4 Heart. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, because your words are the source of motivation for us to continue bringing you even more stories that touch the heart.